You think you know what a coyote is? The scrawny dog-shaped animal that yips at night. The one that raids trash cans and runs from anything bigger than it. That image is wrong. And the gap between what you think the coyote is and what it actually is, that gap is currently expanding into every major city in North America. Here is what the data shows. The coyote now lives in every US state except Hawaii. It has been documented denning near one of the busiest airports on the continent, walking through Manhattan in broad daylight, and, in at least 2 confirmed cases, killing a human being who never saw it coming. Not a myth passed between hunters, in coroners' reports. And the reason most people don't take it seriously is the same reason it's been able to expand this fast. Everything about how it looks tells you the wrong story. Start with the size, because the size is the first lie. An adult coyote weighs between 15 and 46 pounds, smaller than most family dogs, a fraction of a wolf's mass. Next to the animals people already fear, it looks almost harmless. That assumption is built into nearly every human encounter with it. But weight was never the variable that mattered, and it's no longer even accurate. Since the 1950s, coyotes expanding east across the continent have been interbreeding, first with wolves, then in some populations with domestic dogs. Genetic research out of Trent University and the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences found that eastern coyote populations now carry measurable wolf ancestry, and in some regions, dog ancestry as well. Researchers use a specific term for the result: coywolf. The hybrid isn't just bigger. Genetic data links the hybridization to increased skull and jaw size, and to altered pack hunting behavior capable of taking down prey as large as deer, something a purebred western coyote almost never attempts alone. A larger skull means a stronger bite. Researchers have measured the jaw structure of eastern hybrids as capable of exerting significantly more force than a western coyote of similar body weight, closer in proportion to a small wolf than to the animal it's descended from. Some researchers have also proposed a third change: a reduced wariness toward humans in hybrid populations, compared to western coyotes that stayed genetically closer to the original. That specific claim is harder to confirm than the size and jaw data. Behavior is shaped by habituation and food access as much as by ancestry, but the researchers studying it consider it a live hypothesis, not a settled fact. The hybridization didn't stay contained to one region either. Genetic studies tracking the coy wolf's ancestry have found the wolf and dog DNA concentrated most heavily in populations from the Great Lakes through New England and into eastern Canada, the exact corridor the animal used to expand into territory wolves used to hold. Coyotes further west and south in states like Arizona or Texas show far less of that mixed ancestry. The hybrid isn't the coyote. It's what the coyote became specifically where it had the opportunity to interbreed on its way into your backyard. The animal spreading across your city is not the animal your grandparents grew up avoiding. It's already changed. It's still changing. And it's doing it in the exact habitat where you live. Here is the part that should concern you more than the genetics. The coyote didn't just expand because it adapted well. It expanded because we cleared the competition for it. Before the 20th century, coyotes were a Great Plains animal, held in check across most of the continent by an older, larger predator, the gray wolf. Where wolves existed, coyote populations stayed suppressed, outcompeted for territory, and, in direct encounters, killed outright. Then wolves were exterminated across the vast majority of the continental United States. Starting in the early 1900s and accelerating for decades, the federal government, through what was then the Bureau of Biological Survey, ran organized poisoning, trapping, and bounty programs aimed specifically at wolves, alongside private ranching interests doing the same at a local level. By the mid-20th century, wolves had been eliminated from nearly every state south of the Canadian border, surviving only in small pockets of the northern Great Lakes region and parts of the Rockies. Ecologists have a name for what happens when a dominant predator is removed and a smaller one moves up to take its place unchecked: mesopredator release. It's not unique to coyotes, The same pattern shows up with foxes, raccoons, and other mid-sized carnivores whenever the top of a food chain is emptied out. What made the coyotes' version of that pattern different is scale. Nowhere else in the world has an entire continent's dominant land predator been removed this completely, this fast, right as that continent was building the largest urban infrastructure in its history. The wolf's absence didn't leave an empty niche. It left a door. The coyote walked through it, east into New England, into New York, into the Carolinas, north into Canada, south into Central America. Today, its range is larger than it has ever been in recorded history, and it is the only mid-sized North American predator whose range has expanded, not contracted, in the last 100 years, while nearly every other large carnivore on the continent has lost ground. Something built to fill a vacant top predator role, doing exactly that, at scale, in the same decades that humans built cities across the same territory. That is the setup. The occupation is what happened next. Stan Garrett is a wildlife ecologist at Ohio State University. In the year 2000, he started what would become one of the longest-running studies of any urban predator in the world, the Urban Coyote Research Project, centered in the Chicago metropolitan area, over 9 million people, and, according to Garrett's tracking data, thousands of coyotes living inside the city limits at any given time. His team, GPS, collared hundreds of animals across 2 decades. What the data showed dismantled the assumption most people carry about urban wildlife. The coyotes were not living on the margins of the city, scavenging in isolated pockets. They were living inside it, denning under highway overpasses, raising litters in cemetery grounds, crossing 8-lane roads at precisely timed intervals that matched gaps in traffic flow. Garrett's team documented a coyote denning within the security perimeter of O'Hare International Airport, one of the busiest airports on Earth, for an extended period before it was detected. The animal had been living inside a facility with continuous human activity, 24 hours a day, undetected. The same research found something else people don't expect. Urban coyotes eat mostly rodents, rabbits, and fruit, not garbage and not pets, despite their reputation. Garrett's team found human food and trash made up a small fraction of the average urban coyote's diet, and that most established pairs held fixed territories they defended year-round, the same way a rural pack would, just compressed into a few square miles of city instead of open range. The collared coyotes also revealed something about behavior that unsettled Garrett's own team. Urban coyotes had, on average, become significantly better than rural ones at avoiding detection specifically during daylight hours when humans were present, not through instinct, but through what the research team described as learned scheduling. The animals were adjusting movement patterns generation over generation, based on data about human activity that no single coyote could have learned alone. Garrett's tracking data turned up another detail that cuts against the fear people usually project onto this animal. The leading causes of death for Chicago's urban coyotes were vehicle strikes and disease, not conflict with humans, and not conflict with other coyotes over territory. Collared animals in his study have been documented living well over a decade in the middle of one of the largest metro areas in the country, longer, on average, than many rural coyotes, which face more hunting and trapping pressure outside city limits. The city, in other words, isn't just tolerating this animal. In measurable ways, it is protecting it. That is not an animal surviving in a hostile environment. That is an animal studying it. In October 2010, a coyote crossed into Manhattan and was tracked moving through Central Park in broad daylight, filmed by pedestrians, before it was eventually captured by NYPD and wildlife officials near Tribeca. It wasn't the first, and it wasn't the last. Coyote sightings inside New York City, a landmass surrounded by water on every side, have been documented consistently since, with wildlife biologists confirming the animals crossed the Hudson via bridges and, in at least one tracked case, by swimming. An animal built for open plains, adapting its entire movement strategy to navigate a city of 8 million people, using infrastructure engineered by humans. for humans. And in cases where that adaptation goes wrong for the humans involved, the outcome is not always a stolen chicken or a missing house cat. On August 24, 1981, in Glendale, California, a 3-year-old girl named Kelly Keene was attacked by a coyote in her own driveway, a few feet from her front door. Her father heard her screams and fought the animal off, but Kelly died from her injuries. It remains the first confirmed fatal coyote attack on a human recorded in California history. Wildlife officials at the time described the case as an anomaly. It was not treated as a pattern. For decades, it wasn't. Then, on October 27, 2009, in Cape Breton Highlands National Park in Nova Scotia, Canada, a 19-year-old folk singer named Taylor Mitchell was attacked and killed by a pack of coyotes while hiking alone. Park rangers who responded found and shot 2 coyotes at the scene. It remains the only confirmed fatal coyote attack on an adult in Canadian history. 2 fatal attacks, decades apart, in 2 different countries, on 2 people who did nothing to provoke an encounter. Between those 2 cases, wildlife agencies across the US and Canada have documented hundreds of non-fatal attacks and bites, concentrated overwhelmingly in exactly the environment this video has been describing: urban and suburban areas, where habituated coyotes have learned that humans rarely pose a real threat. Southern California alone recorded a sustained spike in coyote attacks on children and small pets through the late 20th century, concentrated in neighborhoods bordering canyons and greenbelts, the exact transition zones where wild habitat meets human development. Wildlife agencies eventually developed dedicated hazing and response protocols, specifically because the pattern had become too consistent to categorize as isolated incidents. Those protocols are built around one central idea: never let a coyote treat a human neighborhood as a safe place to linger. Agencies now advise residents to make noise, stand tall, and never turn and run if a coyote is bold enough to approach in daylight, because running is the one response that mimics prey behavior an urban predator has been quietly learning to recognize. The same agencies point to one preventable factor behind most bold encounters: intentional or accidental feeding. A coyote that associates a specific yard, trail, or person with food loses the caution that keeps the species and its human neighbors at a safe distance from each other. And once that association forms in one animal, researchers have found it tends to spread through the local population faster than wildlife managers can intervene. Unsecured trash, pet food left outside, and small pets allowed to roam off-leash in known coyote corridors are the 3 most commonly cited triggers in the incident reports agencies use to track this pattern. The common thread in nearly every documented case: the animal had prior, repeated, unchallenged contact with humans before the attack occurred. Familiarity did not produce caution. It produced permission. This is where the coywolf genetics stop being a footnote and become the center of the problem. Research analyzing eastern coyote-wolf dog hybrids has found that the hybridization event wasn't a single accident. It was a repeated, ongoing process, still measurable in current populations. And the behavioral traits inherited from the wolf side of that lineage, pack coordination, willingness to target prey larger than a single coyote could take alone, are the traits present in the group hunting behavior seen in Taylor Mitchell's death. The coordinated, sustained nature of that attack was inconsistent with the solitary, opportunistic pattern typically associated with a purebred western coyote. The population expanding through the northeastern United States and eastern Canada right now is not simply a coyote with a wider range. It is, in measurable genetic and behavioral terms, a different animal than the one your grandparents learned to dismiss. Here is what wildlife researchers still cannot fully answer. Habituation is well documented. The mechanism, repeated neutral contact eroding a wild animal's baseline caution, is understood in dozens of species. What isn't understood, according to Geert's own team and other urban carnivore researchers, is where the ceiling is. Whether an urban coyote population, generation after generation, continues losing fear of humans indefinitely, or whether it stabilizes at some threshold researchers haven't yet identified. Chicago's population, one of the most intensively studied urban predator populations on Earth, has not shown a spike in serious attacks proportional to its population growth, which some researchers read as reassuring, and others read as simply meaning the threshold hasn't been crossed yet in that specific city. Part of the disagreement comes down to how recently this entire dynamic even started. Widespread urban coyote habituation is largely a phenomenon of the last 3 to 4 decades. Multi-generational studies long enough to answer the ceiling question properly would need to track hundreds of coyote generations under stable urban conditions, and stable urban conditions on a timescale like that are themselves a moving target. Cities keep expanding into what used to be the coyote's edge habitat, which means the experiment researchers are trying to measure keeps changing shape underneath them while they're still running it. Nobody currently studying this animal is willing to say with confidence which explanation is correct. What they will say is that the animal getting closer to your home every year is smarter, more adaptable, and less afraid than the one that existed in the same territory 50 years ago. And that the 2 confirmed fatal attacks on record did not happen in remote wilderness. One happened in a family driveway. The other happened on a hiking trail a normal, cautious person would have considered safe. There are an estimated several million coyotes across North America today. Nobody has an exact count because the animal has proven nearly impossible to fully census across the range it now occupies. It is not endangered. It is not declining. It is, by nearly every ecological measure, one of the most successful wild carnivores on the continent, expanding into territory that includes some of the largest cities ever built. Most people carry a picture of this animal assembled from cartoons and half-remembered nature specials, a scrawny scavenger running from anything larger than itself. That picture is not just inaccurate, it's the exact condition that let the coy wolf get this close, this fast, without anyone treating it as what the data says it already is. An adaptable, increasingly confident, occasionally lethal predator that has been quietly moving into the spaces around your home for longer than you've been paying attention.